Welcome to the Tippy Top Entrepreneur Experience. Joshua Weston from Space Forge. It's great to have such an accomplished entrepreneur on the show. Thanks again for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much, Alex. Not sure if I'd describe myself as accomplished just yet, but real pleasure to be here.
Well, you're on the way to the moon, that's for sure. And pleasure's all mine, I can assure you that. Now, for those of you who don't already know, Josh and Space Forge recently completed the largest seed fund space sector raise in the European Union at $10.2 million. The round was led by a number of well-known US and EU VCs, including Type 1 Ventures, Space Fund, and of course, World Fund. It included participation from many other VCs, including Newable and DBW, which led the pre-seed round in mid-2020, which is how Josh and I actually met. Now, Josh, before we go any further, do you want to tell us a bit about how you actually got here?
Yeah, sure. So for everybody who's not met me, so my name's Josh and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Space Forge. Space Forge is an in-space manufacturing company, and we're building the world's first returnable and relaunchable satellite platform. We're doing that in order to create materials in space that cannot be made on Earth. These materials, when returned to our planet, enable paradigm shifting changes in the way that we work with natural resources of Earth, our environment, and really how we consume as humans. To the extent that we can lower energy consumption by about 60%, which has the knock-on benefit of reducing CO2 emissions by about 75%. And that's even after we've been to space. As to how I got here, like most people in the space industry, always been fascinated about space. Kind of the best anecdote I have of that is that when I was 3, my mum made me a birthday cake in the shape of a rocket. And when I was 23, my girlfriend, who's now my wife, made me pretty much an identical cake, having never seen pictures of the one that when I was 3, and it even had me like peeping my head out of a porthole window. It was kind of like, it was nice, but it was also quite eerie that they looked so identical. I didn't graduate as an engineer. I actually studied politics at university, but was very fortunate enough to basically just go for it for the space industry. Literally, I emailed the CEO of a space company asking for a job interview. He was kind enough to give me one. I landed a job and have been in the sector pretty much since graduating. Having worked at Thales, a large European space and aerospace company, I also did some time for the UK Space Agency working on national security and strategy. But in 2018, true kind of, in a garage on the outskirts of Bristol, started Space Forge with my friend and co-founder, Andrew Bacon.
They're fabulous. No, really good to have all that experience, and obviously we're going to touch on a lot of your fundraising journey. In terms of the 3 main topics, what we've come up with today is, and Josh knows this better than anyone, pick your investors carefully. Number 2, how to deal with investors and service provider, because there is a bit of a knack. And 3, the importance of team and why dilution doesn't matter. So diving straight in with pick your investors carefully. Josh, you've mentioned there's a lot of dumb money in the UK and that entrepreneurs need to find smart money as soon as possible. Do go on.
Yeah. So what I mean by that is that now that we've raised money from America, Germany, Singapore, South Korea, and the UK, I have seen lots of different approaches to investing. And I've also seen lots of different investment ecosystems. So, the stuff that goes on in Silicon Valley and America is worlds apart from the way that the UK financial ecosystem operates. And it's not to get too much into the history, but basically the way that both venture capital systems evolved was very different. So in the UK, it was largely a finance drive. Whereas in America, most of the original venture opportunity came from people who had already created successful companies and were looking to improve the ecosystem. And that's kind of led to a very chalk and cheese approach when working with UK and American investors at the same time. But what I mean by that dumb money in the UK is that there are lots of mechanisms available to early stage investors to improve their outcome. specifically thinking about SEIS and EIS, Enterprise Investment Scheme, I want to say, is what that stands for. And while that's good at ensuring money flows in the right direction towards the entrepreneurial ecosystem, it's not necessarily attached to any particular speciality or ability to assist that company later. So really my main word of advice here with any company, any startup listening to this, is to leverage the EIS and SEIS system to your advantage as a tool for you to encourage smart money to improve the outcome rather than accepting the first money that comes along. And I think that finding smart money, certainly in something like space technology in the UK, is very hard to do. As you might imagine, the space ecosystem in the UK is a very small industry. You know, when I was growing up, I thought I had to be an American citizen and I could only go and work at NASA to work in space. It wasn't until I was in my final year of university and Tim Peake got selected for his mission on the space station that I found out the UK even had a space industry. If I'd known, I probably would have taken a very different career and studying options earlier in my life. And so because it's such a small ecosystem, there aren't many investors who even operate in the space industry in the UK, or to be honest, as you probably know, less that even operate in hardware itself, which is obviously our bread and butter. And so it's been really interesting to see the evolution between kind of where money has started to get smart in the UK as we've grown on our Space Forge journey, and at the same time come across those international flavors of around how different VC ecosystems work, having taken in so much international investment.
Amazing experience. So you've got it from literally all corners of the globe. Useful insights. And going on this journey, you've said it was a learning curve and a steep one at that. Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, so Space Forge is the first company myself and Andrew have ever started. I wouldn't say it's the first time we've been entrepreneurs. I mean, you know, classic selling sweets out of a backpack at school and that kind of thing. But really, this is the first time we've gone, you know, no holds barred and all in. And there are, I suppose, the same way that there is dumb money and smart money, there are dumb services and smart services to help you along the way. And the ecosystem in the UK, certainly from my experience, has been such that you will come across a lot of entities, companies, different service providers, lawyers, accountants, facilities that will say that they are there to help you out, but quite frankly, they're not going to offer you the best deal. So really, we came up an incredibly steep learning curve across all of those angles. Certainly during a pandemic, trying to access facilities was probably the hardest time in modern day history it has ever been to do so. And across kind of the legal, the accounting, and that facility, those pathways, we really struggled in our early days to find the right people. And to be honest, we wasted a lot of time and money going with the wrong people at the wrong time. Didn't really move the business forward, and became too much of a time sink. That was certainly how I felt really going into the pre-seed. Now we've matured, we understand a lot more. It's a totally different ecosystem which we're working with. And a couple of places, you know, investors and things have commented, oh, are you sure you want to, you know, be bringing on a head of people so early? And I'm like, well, in 18 months, we 10x'd our headcount. So yeah, because we're probably going to be doing it again. So that's also been really valuable. And you do come up a very steep learning curve as well, as a first-time entrepreneur, if you don't have a finance background, in the difference between maths and economics. Always wondered why they were taught separately growing up. You know, I just assumed, you know, economics was maths, but it had a pound sign or a dollar sign in front of it. No, the investment ecosystem completely teaches you where they diverge and how they diverge. And so learning a lot more around kind of share pools, options, how the investment ecosystem works, understanding dilution as we come onto that later, And that's really, it's incredibly valuable information to have,
Mm.
even if you're not an entrepreneur, just to understand how that entire industry works and how you can leverage it to improve even things like your own personal savings. But it was really interesting to come up that learning curve and to understand then basically that I wouldn't have had that knowledge if I hadn't done SpaceForge.
Yeah.
And it's a really interesting kind of, how would I describe it? Social dilemma, just that there is so much financial illiteracy in the UK with how to, like my family looking in at what I do, they're like, oh, okay, we think you build satellites, and that's as far as they go.
Yeah.
And explaining how the investment works and everything else to like my brother or my mum is really interesting, just because I'm like, if I hadn't done this, I wouldn't have known.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of guests on the show that say just become an entrepreneur or raise a fund. If you're a VC, you'll learn so much, you'll build such a big network. Even if it doesn't work out, you're still going to be in a far better place than when you started. And speaking of that, instead of going on a 6-month journey and learning through trial and error and probably failure, what's the best way that entrepreneurs can glean this information?
So talk to people who are doing it or who have done it. Coming from kind of my background, I didn't really know anybody that had done it. I didn't know anybody that was running a startup. I didn't know anybody that worked in investment banking or anything like that. So there's an even bigger hill to climb if you're not already familiar with those ecosystems. As to ways to improve it, I think there are probably things that exist in every sector that are similar to the things that exist in the space sector. So in the UK, for example, if you're a student, there is the UK SEDS, UK Students for the Exploration and Development of Space, which you can participate in. You don't have to be an engineering or a physics graduate. They welcome everybody from any discipline. If I had known about that when I was younger, that would have been a really great place to go. It's where all of the companies they attend, they look for student recruits and everything else, but they also have really valuable speakers who are really happy to engage with the students, because those speakers were those students once upon a time, and they're just as happy to give their time to understand what problems it is you might be building. At the same time, I'd also give a shout out to the Space Generation Advisory Council. It's attributed to the UN Office for Space. Really valuable international organization. It runs a couple of in-person conferences a year. You can access funding and grants to go to those conferences, and I was lucky enough to secure one back in 2019 to go to Washington, DC, to go to the International Astronautical Congress. That exposed me to this American ecosystem, and at that one event I met 5 of our current investors. At the time, didn't know they were going to be our investors. SpaceForge was still pretty much in its infancy at this point, but just carrying on those relationships with the people I met there ended up being really valuable. So there are those sorts of things that you can participate in. But at the same time, I would say doing 6 months of trial and error and failing is better to have tried than it is to not do it.
Yeah.
Andrew and I were in a fortunate position that basically Thales were willing to let us go. Essentially, we condensed our hours in order to go work on SpaceForge more. And that was incredibly valuable, because we were able to take those early risks without too much of a risk to our current income situation. Having said that, when I did quit my job, it ended up being the first week of UK lockdown. So that was a really super intense time to not have a job and not be totally sure on income, but it ended up working out quite well. And if anything, I'd probably say it encouraged us to make more of SpaceForge than it might have done if we were in a different setting.
Absolutely. And there's something to be said for that smooth transition. And I know there was still a cliff in there, but people just say, all right, I quit and I'm starting from scratch. And you don't want to lose that momentum in your career or in a business. So that's a really nice story. And in terms of, you've had a very good experience with investors, or some, but particularly in terms of investors, making sure you're adequately incentivized and protecting your stake on the cap table. Can you talk us through that?
Sure. So this is really, again, an extension of the lesson between the difference between economics and maths. And again, one of the ecosystems that we were fortunate enough to get plugged into was Set Squared, based in, I think, 6 different university cities across the UK, most recently including Cardiff. But I was fortunate enough to get some funding to go on a 1-day how to improve your pitch event. And at the end of the day, they sent you to a networking event in Bristol to do that pitch. And I pitched to this chap who was the only person wearing a blazer in the whole event. And I thought, he must have money. Turned out I was wrong, and he'd just done a stint working in America. But importantly, yeah, that's right, yeah. And so his name is Dr. Roger Sykes. He's our chair at Space Forge. And when I met him and I did that, I gave the pitch. He went, "I'm really interested. I'm not an investor, but I think I can help." And that's how that conversation got started. And his mentorship really helped Andrew and I understand this difference between economics and maths, how dilution occurs, even simple things. So when you start a company on Companies House and you pay the £10 or whatever, and it asks you how many shares do you have, you come up with a completely arbitrary figure, 100,000, a million, whatever, and then approaching that logically, you would think that as you take investment on board, you would give those shares away. But one of the real quirks of investing is that no, you create more shares, and that's how you do dilution. That was, that took a lot of explaining for me to understand why that was the way. And then it's really interesting that yes, as you take investment, your percentage stake does decrease. It's a necessary evil, but the amount of shares you have actually stays the same. That was a very strange way of understanding, or very, it seemed alien. Now I understand that quite a bit better. But what you have to, and the way that Andrew and I suppose have always really approached this, is that sure, you can not take investment. There are many companies which benefit from not taking investment. When you're trying to put hardware in space, that comes with a necessary level of capital that it's basically impossible to do solo unless you've already had a successful business somewhere else that's made you millions. And really, the way that we always looked at this was one, having investors on board can be incredibly useful, again, especially where you find that smart money with people who are sector experts or can help you with finding other investors, later stage finance. They've got a good network of talent to assist you. And at the same time, everybody on that cap table deserves a good return because they've taken that risk. And the way that I look at it is it's better to have 10% of something than 100% of nothing. And really, I think that's always been kind of our driving ethos. So one of the things we do at Space Forge is every employee that joins us gets to join our employee share option pool, for example. We really believe that if you're joining Space Forge, certainly at this stage in our journey, you are already taking significant risk. And while we can promise you, the one thing we promise at Space Forge is we don't promise it will be easy, but we promise you'll never be bored. And one of those things that we do is every employee that joins us gets a piece of that ownership. So we set aside some of the company for employee ownership. Andrew and I have our stakes, and then investors and a few non-execs make up the rest of that pool. But really, dilution, it doesn't matter if it helps you achieve your vision. And ultimately, I believe that achieving that vision is better than personal wealth. Personal wealth is nice, it's very helpful. But really, I want to see a world where Space Forge is successful and is helping the planet. And me seeing that happen, far more important to me than having some zeros or something in my bank account.
Well, with that kind of vision, you'll probably end up getting the best of both worlds, or at least I hope so. So,
well, yeah. I do hope so. I do want to be rewarded, but I think it's really important that my personal opinion is that companies that start out with missions rather than the simple "I want to make money" do better.
Yeah, absolutely. Because when the going gets hard and you're just focused on money, you might give up. Whereas if you've got a vision, it's not about that. Absolutely.
Exactly.
And I think suffice to say, everyone on your cap table clearly understand, from the founders of the business, you and Andy, to the investors, understand the value of incentivization and that equity journey, so that everyone is aligned. It's not investors trying to grab too big of a share. It's not you trying to hoard all the equity. Everyone in the company is on the same spaceship. So
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, would it help if I gave some insight into that kind of development?
absolutely.
So I mean, when we did our pre-seed, we were incredibly fortunate that we did 2 pitches to 2 different investors, and both of them said yes. So one was the Development Bank of Wales, and the other one was Bristol Private Equity Club, an angel syndicate. Both of them, so both DBW and BPEC, have observers to our board. And it was really interesting. I was talking to our observer Rupert from BPEC recently. He was like, "I had no idea that was your first ever presentation," and which was, really good. Although I look back at that first ever pitch deck and I thought, "Oh my God, why did anybody ever back us?" It was one of the worst things I ever read. Even things like our team slide was like, "Josh, the CEO from Somerset." Like, why did I ever put that I was from Somerset? What relevance does that have? I don't know why I did it. It was like Andrew, from Kent. I was like, I don't know why we're doing this. But we had certainly on finding investor side, considering the ecosystem which we operate in, space technology and hardware, we had a ridiculously easy pass on our pre-seed compared to many other space companies and startups I know, and to be honest, even startups in other domains. But in the seed round, it was again, another steep learning curve. So originally, kind of around this time last year, we were looking to raise between 1.5 and 2 million for SpaceForge, and beyond kind of pro rata and follow-on interest from DBW and BPEC, which was maybe 3/4 to 1 million, perhaps. Finding that lead for that round was proving impossible, certainly within the UK ecosystem, to the extent where we had one investor offer us £2 million, but they wanted 50% of the company. Do not take that deal. Never take it. I would never take it. I'd probably rather fail than I would take a deal like that. And it was this, like, basically we saw the underbelly of venture capital in that round. We saw all sorts of different ways of operating, people who would claim to invest 1 million, but actually they would only trickle in 50k to your company every month, and they would see whether or not you could survive on that 50k, and then that 50k, and then that 50k. Now, they'd tell everybody the headline figure, but they wouldn't tell you about their operating principles. And it was just worlds apart from our pre-seed journey. And it was when we were raising that 1.5 to 2 million that we went back to the US ecosystem, some of those people that I'd met earlier in my career, and we saw significant benefits. So that's where leads like Type 1 and Space Fund came into the mix, was that they were like, "We love what you're doing, we're really excited about it, but we don't think you're raising enough money for what you're trying to accomplish." So that's pretty much music to any founder's ears. Tell me more. And that's where then our new target came from, which was originally £6.5 million, and then ended up being 7.6, because there was just ended up being so much interest in what we were doing, both in the States and internationally, from space investors, hardware investors, aerospace investors, climate investors, that if I hadn't had that phone call to explore opportunities in the States, I really don't know where SpaceForge would have been. But there was that complete pendulum swing from 50% for 2 million to probably can't say what it is, but very healthy 7.6 million, where everybody is doing well, was really significant. And so I would, again, I would echo here, be really careful with your investors. And I would also say, even if you don't know other entrepreneurs or startup founders or whatever, find them on things like Twitter and LinkedIn and reach out to them. They will be so unbelievably helpful. And as much as investors perform due diligence on you, perform due diligence on your investors. And that's how we found out some really scary stories from other companies, from investors who we didn't work with, where they just, they had nothing but bad things to say. And this is the VC industry is still one which really relies on integrity and honor and really word of mouth. And that just, to have bad things said about you in that industry can be a death knell. And that's been really interesting to understand that really probably the only kind of two industries you probably see that in is venture capital and politics. And so having those conversations incredibly important. Certainly I would say, if anybody watching this is looking to set up a company, I can tell you I mostly only know space investors and hardware investors. If my experiences are useful, do please reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to help you. Just, share some war stories. Just because, even now we've had people come up to us with their own space startups. They're probably only 6 months behind where we are. And they're like, I need to understand how this went. And I was like, yes, absolutely. Please don't repeat the mistakes I made and you'll have a much smoother journey.
Yeah.
And that's been a really, almost a humbling experience, I would say.
No, it's very kind of you to offer. And sticking on that, how to deal with investors and some of your war stories, tell us the importance or the value of a quick no from investors.
Yes. So a quick no can sometimes be better than a long yes, and it's definitely better than a long no and a long maybe. So when we were doing that 2 million before it became the 6.5, I spoke to loads of investors. I probably lost count, probably about 70. Proper just spray and pray. I had really, we were talking to all sorts of different ecosystems across the UK and Europe. By this point, we hadn't really engaged with the States. And I spent probably about 9 months of effort on one investor for them to turn around and say, no. I haven't gone back to calculate the hours I spent working and preparing for that investor, mostly because it probably made me cry. If they are that much of a time sink, I find that they're probably not looking to say yes. They're either looking at you because they're doing due diligence on one of your competitors, and they want to understand whether or not that company is going to be successful, or they are continually looking to you to perform their own market research to underpin their thesis and still say no, but be much better prepared for when a similar opportunity comes along in a couple of years. And my longest no was about 9 months. My shortest no was about 13 minutes. Literally, I just finished the pitch and he went, I love what you're doing. This is way too risky for our portfolio. Thank you.
Yeah.
That was music to my ears, because I'd only given the boilerplate pitch, answered a couple of questions, and he was like, we just can't do this. It's far too risky. Cool. No problem. We understand, we're a space company. We're not for everybody. But that can be incredibly valuable. But what was really valuable out of some of those quick no's where they were like, oh, this isn't suitable for our portfolio. However, let me introduce you to, I don't know, Dan. He would probably really like this.
Yeah.
And you can really leverage those quick no's where you built up a good relationship with those people to help you find people who might say yes. And that was really valuable, both in the UK, the States, and further abroad, to finding those people who eventually did say yes.
Yeah.
And I would also say as well, one of the things that I've really learned now is the ecosystem that you create at whatever stage, leverage it. You can find investors in some really strange corners, or you can find out some people who you might have worked with several years ago are actually an angel investor and you never knew, and all of these things. And so when you find those first 2 or 3 investors, leverage them and their networks to find more investors. Certainly if you need the more capital as well.
And if I could build on that quick no, entrepreneurs and VCs shouldn't look at it like a transaction. It should be, it's relationship building. There might be a check, there might not be, but build that ecosystem, build those relationships, and the money will come to you, or the deals will come to you if you're an entrepreneur. I mean,
Oh yeah, absolutely. I would, I've certainly echoed that. I mean, several investors passed on us that after closing this round emailed me to say, congratulations, love to keep in touch. Really excited as you continue to develop your business. Perhaps we can join the next round. And that is that's kind of in many ways that's better than raising the money, because you knew that you were telling the right story. It just wasn't the right time.
Yeah.
And those relationships can become incredibly lucrative later on.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. And then you've had investors ghost you after agreeing to a meeting, and obviously they're kicking themselves while listening to this show. What other naughty investor behavior have you seen?
So yeah, ghosting is probably the main one. I would say to that as well is that a couple of places, again, investors we've said no to, where they have sent such onerous terms. You can only think that, quite frankly, they're probably being cowardly. They know you're going to refuse these terms, but it saves their face from having to say no. So again, 50% of the company, all the way through to, I mean, there was one investor that sent us, they wanted an 8x down round preference. And like afterwards, basically everybody previously would have ended up with about 2% as a company. It was just a bizarre thing, because it was like, of course everybody's going to say no to that. I mean, who would say yes?
Was that an 8x liquidation preference?
No, this was what was this, like a ratchet provision on a down round? So yeah, it was I mean, some liquidation preferences you can handle, of course. They're in there to incentivize you to improve on the valuation of the company. But no, this was downside protection.
Wow.
So again, that was a fast no from us. And I would say as well is that occasionally you see, investor fees. Do be careful of them. Some are fair, some are not. And I would also say as well that be careful sometimes when investors suggest using various accounting firms or lawyers or whatever to help you set up something, because there's got to be something in it for them. So I'm quite happy to say now. So we changed our lawyer from our pre-seed to our seed. All of our lawyer fees and any investor fees we agreed to pay in the seed round was lower than our own lawyer fees in our pre-seed by about 10k. But you're comparing raising about 500,000 to 7.6 million. That's the steepest learning curve I've come up with, and that is like I'm happy to admit it now and stuff. And but what really amazed me was, at the time everybody was like, oh yeah, well that's a pretty good deal, that lawyer's done a lot of work. And I was like, okay, I guess, I know lawyers are expensive. I didn't realize they were that expensive. Again, an ecosystem I'm not familiar with until now. Going into the seed round, finding different lawyers, again, doing your due diligence on them. So I spoke to some different startup founders, and by this point kind of built up a community of friends who all have their own startups going, finding out who they were working with, meeting their lawyers and stuff that they recommended, finding much better ones in terms of relationship building and time spent with me, helping me understand various new terms and things that were coming in alongside a much better price. And that was really valuable. So do be careful when sometimes it's like, it's a bit like if you're trying to buy a house or something and then they're like, oh, we would prefer you to use our surveyor. And it's like, well, why is that? And it's because they're getting a kickback, or sorry, they're taking fees. Kickback sounds like bribery. But importantly, having strong relationships on what would I describe as the support services that help you get these deals closed is so important. Because having a good lawyer, having a good part-time CFO or whatever it might be, can be so incredibly useful in just smoothing out these sorts of transactions, because they are both a marathon and a sprint. Some things will require rapid 8-hour turnaround, but at the same time you're waiting for the money to come into the bank, and that might take a couple of weeks.
Absolutely. And I think that's the message. Pay for good quality advice. It's always worth it. But also, again, do your references, do your homework, make sure you're not getting fleeced. And we do see a lot of charlatans in the industry, and I think it's because it's quite emerging, especially in the UK. I think the other place where you see high fees is with solicitors, but with deal introducers. Have you got any experience with those?
Yes, in that we've said no to all of them, because what they offer, really, I think, well, on one side, I think it's an incredibly valuable experience for you to have as a founder or an operator, whatever you prefer to call yourself, in finding people who can invest yourself. And at the same time, the value of those introductions can be minimal. And again, pretty much a spray and pray approach. But if they get, you know, one success in every 100 successes, they still get to walk away with their very, very high fees for doing little more than sending maybe an email and a pitch deck to somebody they know but you don't, which quite frankly 2 weeks later you might have found out by yourself.
Yeah.
So we have seen deal introducers. The going rate from memory was about, they all wanted about 8%. Yeah. Wow. Whatever they helped you raise was 8%, is what they would take. And it was, you know, I mean, 8% of most things is actually a pretty significant amount. Certainly in the industry we're in, you know, 8% is the difference between us being able to hire a couple more engineers or not. Really staggering fees. And again, you know, it wasn't, if it was introduction to really, really smart money, you know, if they were going to find me the ex-head of the European Space Agency and they were going to join my board, okay, that might be worth it. But really it was, you know, it was introductions to high net worth individuals, family offices who, you know, made money in real estate or something like that. And while it could get you the cash, it couldn't get you the assistance you might need elsewhere.
Yeah, no, I mean, 8% of £7.6 million is a big number. I've actually heard of a startup that got some deal introducers to help them with their raise. They ended up raising using other connections, and the startup still had to pay over between, you know, roughly about £300,000 for nothing.
Yeah.
So yeah, be very careful and watch out on those fees. Great. And then talking about, I want to talk about team. Now, this is quite a contentious one for a lot of people. And I always say, you know, people say, I need to raise money so that I can hire all these people. And I said, well, why not get a co-founder? And then they're worried about the dilution, and almost like they take the dilution from the investors to get the cash to then pay for a co-founder, and try go at it alone. You've done it the right way, I would say. You've said straight away, part with 50% equity for a co-founder. The dilution doesn't matter. Talk us through that.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm in the incredibly fortunate position with Andrew, my co-founder, that we've been working together for quite some time already. And both of us are, you know, we're very open that if neither one of us was doing this, then the other one would not have succeeded. And pretty much where my skills end, Andrew's begin. Most phenomenal engineer I've ever had the privilege of working with. You know, he does maths, which I'd need several calculators to do in his head, let alone everything else he's capable of. You know, he's a walking encyclopedia of space missions as well, which is really helpful at pub quizzes. But importantly, you know, and both of us know that, you know, we know that we've been successful because of each other, but trying to do it solo, it's an incredible amount of stress. You know, as fun as SpaceForge is, and probably any startup, it is hard. It is not glamorous. There's a brief maybe kind of 3-month honeymoon period where you're like, yes, I'm my own boss and everything else, and very quickly that fades. Because it's not about, oh yes, I'm going to work 3 days and then take the rest of the week off or anything like that. All the time I'm switched on. You know, I dream about SpaceForge. A couple of times I've woken up at 4 a.m. and been like, oh, that's how I need to approach that problem, and I'll run down and scribble it in my notebook. Yeah. Having a co-founder means that burden is shared. Think of Frodo and Samwise. You know, Samwise was ultimately the one that threw the ring. That's the kind of relationship you want with a co-founder. Find somebody that you trust. And I really think trust is the most important part of this, that you can trust them to do a good job. Second to that, complementary skills that you don't have or areas that they might be better in. And then I would start worrying about all the other things. But most importantly, I think you want to work with somebody that you trust, that you get on well with, and that you can be frank and open with. I'm not saying hire your best friend, because if you have a fallout, you might not be friends afterwards or anything like that. But I am saying you want to know that you can really work with them. And as to that hit on equity, who cares? Would you rather make a success of it and have something to show for it, or would you rather do it solo? 6 months later, you've burnt all your cash. Everybody's telling you can't do it solo, and you're done. And you probably burn out as well. I would also say, this has been said to me quite a lot. I probably haven't had it because I've got co-founders. Everybody says it's lonely at the top. Unless you know other people in founding positions, there isn't really like an ecosystem that you can go to understand or that can empathize with your problems, or the trials that you might be facing. Having a co-founder completely reduces that, because you're in it together. And I just really think that's so incredibly valuable to have somebody, where you can support each other in making this work.
And you can probably get some generic entrepreneur advice, but no one's ever done what you're doing in the UK on this journey. So having a co-founder there, that's the best empathy you can probably have.
Yeah. I mean, certainly in the space ecosystem. I now know 3 successful entrepreneurs in the space ecosystem that have created a space company in the UK and either taken it public or exited. But that's, probably the space ecosystem employs about 20,000 people. So obviously, 3 in 20,000, literally quite a needle in a haystack. In other industries, it might be different. I can't speak for fintech or SaaS or anything like that. But I think it's really important to find those people that can help you. And yeah, as you say, Alex, lots of generic advice out there, but find those like innovation clusters, the set squares. Maybe your university has a business incubation center, something like that, where you can find those people who are either on that journey, only a few months ahead of you, or there might be somebody sat in that room that has done it a couple of times and can share those kind of, those nuggets of wisdom.
Yeah, well said. Now, final question. You've recruited a rather large and incredibly smart team. Do you want to tell us a bit about your hiring strategy and how you're preserving the culture that you initially started with?
Yeah, sure. That's a good question. So I would say openly, I'm probably the dumbest person in the room at SpaceForge, certainly when it comes on how to build a satellite. I am, again, much like it is working with Andrew, utter privilege to work with my team every day. They all do things I cannot understand at speeds which a couple of years ago I would have considered unfathomable for the space industry. What we did when we started SpaceForge, and we were looking for I think we were looking for 3 hires, because we'd closed our funding and we had secured an Innovate project, I think. And we were looking for three people, graduate level, to come and help us. That they could learn from Andrew on the engineering side, they could learn from me on the kind of bid writing and proposal project side. And Andrew and I sat down and we said, okay, so what do we need? So we looked at the engineering and the skills and everything else, and we were like, well, ultimately we can teach all of those things. Graduates, and a good experience you might have as university, does not really prepare you for the working world. And what we said was we were looking for people who came with some of those skills, could learn, but importantly were different to Andrew and I. And that was our first, I guess, how would I describe it? It was almost our diversity policy, was not be me or Andrew. So if they looked too much like Andrew, or if they were too much like me, then we were like, okay, this probably isn't going to work, because Andrew and I are already pretty big personalities. And so that got us, we were completely frank in the job advert. We put, we are 2 people working in a garage in Bristol. Like, this is going to be a real rough and ready job. And we had over 150 people apply for that first posting, all over the world. So at SpaceForge today, we represent 14 or 15 countries. Honestly, I'm losing track. 14 or 15 countries in 27 people. and we have hired from as far east as Japan and as far south as Brazil. And so, yeah, as a startup, trying to whittle through 150 candidates quickly and fairly is a very difficult thing to do. We put all sorts of kind of Excel macros to get it through quicker. We probably ended up interviewing about 25 people for those 3 positions. The first person we interviewed was a girl from Brazil, Anna, who did join us, but it took 7 months to get her visa approved. So she joined for a different position to the one we originally were going to hire her for. And we also had an intern join us as well in the summer. But once we got through that and we were like, okay, we need to make this repeatable because this way is never going to work again. What we did was we codified our values, and we codified our values really, really early on in a company's process. So, you know, if you're working at a big company right now, I'm sure that you'll get told your values are like honesty, integrity, knowledge sharing, and compassion, or something like that. And you know, it's all rubbish. And you know, you scrape it off, and basically underneath it would say return value to shareholders. That's fine. That's what all public companies are there to do, but they should be open about it. And so we were like, okay, right now we don't really have that problem. By that point, we had a couple of investors, but the joy of being a private company is your investors are interested in your vision as well as that return financially. And so we were like, okay, let's take a step back. What do we want to do at Space Forge? And we ran like a very small internal survey by the time we got to about 7 people. And out of that came, are there any blockers to working at Space Forge? What do you need to see improve? And why are you here? What is it that gets you up in the morning? And that gave us our 5 values at Space Forge very quickly. Ambitious and resilience. So, you know, we're trying to do some things in the world where we'll be the first to do them. So our goals are audacious, but we are resilient where we do not succeed. We then have curious innovator. So we're always open to new ways of doing things, because that's, for one reason, how we've gotten as far as we have done. And I mean that both in the engineering and business side. We then have reflective learners. So we do fail. We fail a lot. We're building new hardware. But importantly, we take the opportunity to learn from those failures. So I'm pleased to say, so far, we've never repeated a mistake twice. So every time we fail, it's always a new way. That's really important to us. A team of equals. So at Space Forge, because we are a small company, we have the opportunity that our organizational structure is pretty flat and everything else. But importantly, if you want to understand something, or you think there's a better way of doing something, that person can raise with anybody else in the organization that opportunity. And that's led to some really interesting discoveries on our part. And lastly, focused on impact. So everything we do at Space Forge is about making essentially how we interact with Earth better. And that's pretty much our entire drive, is that focus. So impact to us, really, we're talking about sustainability, environmentalism, and humanity. So it always annoys me when people are like, oh, you know, we're going to be carbon neutral, and we're here to save the planet. Most people aren't actually interested in saving the planet. What they mean by that is they mean preserving their way of life in the current ecosystem of the planet. They want to continue enjoying trips abroad and everything else, but they don't want it to cost the Earth. And I think that's absolutely fine. And I think it's the driving force of most people. But that's really what we're saying when we're saying making space work for humanity. Our tagline at Space Forge is, we mean so that we can coexist with the natural resources we have available on this planet, but still enjoy modern living. And once we codified those values, they then became the basis for our entire interview process. So at Space Forge, I mean, it's pretty quick. We only have kind of a 2-stage interview process. So you send in your application, typical, why would you like to work at Space Forge? What would you bring to the role? If the answers to those questions are good, we look at your CV. If the CV shows that you've got the technical experience or whatever it might be that we're looking for, you move through to what we call a cultural interview. That cultural interview is there to assess team fit. So we ask questions aligned to those cultural values, to understand how you think about them. And at the same time, it's an opportunity as much as it is for the interviewee as the interviewer to understand whether or not they could work with each other. Now, that used to be always done by Andrew and I. We became far too busy to interview everybody for the positions that we were hiring. And I think one of the best things we ever did was we brought the rest of the team into hiring for those positions. So I might now only do 1 in 15, 1 in 20 cultural interviews. The rest are being handled by a couple of the members of the team each time. So you might have only been with Space Forge 6 weeks. Guess what? You're doing a cultural interview. You've freshly gone through it. You're now going to take somebody else through that process that you think would be good to work with. If you pass a cultural interview, we then move you through to a skills interview. One of the things that we felt, certainly coming from engineering businesses, was that you never actually get to understand how good an engineer someone is by sitting down and asking them questions for 45 minutes. So what we do is we set a challenge at Space Forge. Doesn't matter what position you're going for, there is a challenge associated with it, business side or engineering side. And that challenge gets sent to you a week before your interview, and we want to see your approach to solving that challenge in that interview. So there's a short presentation on, this was my approach to this solution. Maybe they solved it, maybe they didn't. We want to understand how they did it. And that's also really valuable because you can then understand how that person works. So, a couple of people we hired were phenomenal. So Anna, the girl from Brazil, she demonstrated how to build a vehicle that could retrieve satellites from the sea, but it was built out of plastic bottles that were collected by favelas in Brazil. Moham, our payload engineer, explained how you could smelt new alloys in space, but the contraption he used to explain it was a pen and a spring. So that was really impressive, and it also saves you a lot as well. So you might get some engineering, might get some software development, for example. You're like, okay, can you tell me how you did that code? And they were like, oh yeah, I did it. I posted it on GitHub and asked for help. And I was like, okay, to a personal project, cool. Company code, probably shouldn't be putting that on GitHub. Yeah. Helps you make some informed decisions about how reliable that person might be around security. And then that, alongside our hiring process, the way that we continue that culture inside is all of those values that are codified have become not only our principles and our values, but our awards. So each month we have, each week we have a warm up and a cool down, but at the end of every month we have an all hands, whole company gets together and we celebrate the successes and the development of Space Forge over that past month. So if somebody has particularly exemplified being ambitious and resilient or focused on impact, they receive an award for that. We 3D printed some pretty cool trophies and we made some custom emojis. So each one is represented by a different animal. And our most coveted award is Failure of the Month, which we also award. Because it's really important that when you have a culture where you celebrate success, you actually really need to celebrate failure, because that creates a culture where people are open about their mistakes. And very quickly you can bring a team together and help solve them or remove that roadblock, whatever it might be. Whereas some places you may have worked in the past, you might have seen that people tend to hide their mistakes so that they don't get blamed for a problem later on. Yeah. You absolutely cannot afford that in a startup, and certainly not one that's so safety critical like the space industry. So having that openness around failure of the month means that as soon as something's gone wrong, we know. And at the same time, failures in developing space technology are generally pretty spectacular. So they make for very cool things to show as well. So we have a trophy cabinet at Space Forge, which is basically our cabinet of failure. And it's just all the various different pieces of hardware and things that we've just broken along the way, or have designed incorrectly and everything else. But importantly, not one of those failures has ever been repeated again. And I think that's so important, that this isn't about, there's an inherent design flaw in how you manufacture something. This is about, we found this flaw, we fixed it, it's no longer a problem. And then you come across to the next problem. And really retiring problems is all what doing a startup in most businesses at early stages about, is finding those problems, getting rid of them and moving on. And I really think celebrating that is key.
Amazing. I wish more companies had that sort of hiring process and culture. It sounds like you've built, I know you've built something phenomenal. So very well done. Very inspiring for the entrepreneurs out there. So I hope you took notes. What I'm going to do is quickly summarize this, and then we're going to come back to you, Josh. So coming back to our first topic about pick your investors carefully. Think about the cultural differences between how the VC community was built up in the US versus the UK. UK was led by finance and the US was led by ex-entrepreneurs. So one might suit you better than the other. Remember to leverage EIS to get the smart money in the UK if you are raising in the UK. Now, entrepreneurship and fundraising is a steep learning curve, and it is always going to be. And the way to prepare yourself for that is to speak to knowledgeable people who have done it before, and get into communities, whatever that is for your particular sector. Now, very importantly, get a very strong mentor and chair. It's going to be the guiding light, especially if it's your first time doing this. And remember that everyone needs to be incentivized by equity, from your investors to your co-founders to your team. Make sure everyone is aligned and on the same rocket ship, Josh. Now, in terms of how to deal with investors and service providers, a quick no is better than a long yes. And when you're raising funds, don't be so transactional. Build relationships, because even if those investors that say no, they can introduce you to someone who might say yes. Of course, watch out for ratchets, high fees, and other naughty investor behavior. Don't mind, it's a good idea to pay for good quality advice. It's always worth it. And then be wary of deal introducers. I'm not saying don't use them, and nor is Josh, but if there's 8% and they're introducing you to some generic money, maybe consider your options. Now, the importance of team and why dilution doesn't matter. As Josh said, being an entrepreneur involves a considerable amount of stress, and it's far better to share that with a co-founder. A problem shared is a problem halved, and who cares about the dilution, as Josh rightly said. Now, in terms of your hiring strategy, consider looking for people that are different to you and hopefully a lot smarter than you, because that's less work for you to do in the end. And in terms of your hiring strategy and your culture, Josh has done a really excellent job, or SpaceForge, Andrew and Josh, of codifying their values, and they use that as their first stage interview process, then onto cultural fit, and then onto skills. And not only onto skills by asking questions, but actual real life problems, working out how people actually work day to day, which is probably one of the better, or if not the best, interview processes I've ever heard of. So thanks again for sharing, Josh. That's been incredibly insightful. Anything else you want to add to that?
I'd just be happy to do another call out that anybody watching or listening to this, if there's anything I can help with, please feel free to reach out. I'd be delighted to help you. And Alex, thank you so much for your time. Really enjoyed speaking with you this morning.
So thanks very much. And where can the listeners reach out? What's the best medium?
Probably either Twitter at Weston J, I think is my handle, or on LinkedIn, Joshua Weston. I'm sure if you do that, if you're connected with Alex, you'll find it easier. I would say those are probably the two best places to find me.
Amazing. Well, thanks for your generosity. Thanks for being on the show. It's been a pleasure as always, and we'll speak soon.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
That's all for this episode. Keep tuning in for more exclusive insights from seasoned investors, accomplished entrepreneurs, and professional service advisors. Follow the Tippy Top blog on all major social media platforms, including Twitter, TikTok, Insta, Facebook, or now Meta, LinkedIn, and of course, you can find me, Alexander Lee, on LinkedIn, and you can also check out my website, thetippytop.com. Until next time, keep pushing, and I'll see you at the Tippy Top.